In the heart of the galaxy, beneath the dark skies of the Empire's capital world, Varix Prime, the grand broadcast platform stood taller than any structure built by man or alien. It was a cold, metallic tower, its peak lost in the mist of artificial clouds. Billions of eyes across hundreds of star systems were tuned in, their screens glowing softly in silent anticipation. Today was no ordinary broadcast. Today the Galactic Empire, a powerful and ancient force led by non-human rulers, would show its strength by making an example out of a single human girl. Her name was Alira Vosyong, quiet and from a forgotten mining colony deep in the Outer Rim. She had been captured weeks ago, accused of stirring rebellion through her words and actions. The Empire called her a threat. They said she had inspired humans across the stars to question their place, to challenge the old ways, to hope. For a race long treated as second-class citizens in the Empire's grand structure, her quiet defiance had become a spark too dangerous to allow. As the countdown to the broadcast began, the air was thick with a strange, nervous energy. The massive screens flickered to life across cities and planets and warships, in prisons, even in schools. Everyone was watching. Even those who had never heard of her before now sat still, drawn in by the quiet storm building around her name. The camera focused on her as she stood on the platform. She wore a plain gray tunic, her hands bound, her hair slightly messy, her face pale from the long days in imperial custody. But her eyes were calm, clear, and almost peaceful.
Oh.
There was no fear in them.
Oh.
Around her stood the imperial counselors, tall and armored in shining robes, their alien faces unreadable. They began to speak, declaring her crimes, listing all the dangers she had posed to the peace of the galaxy. But even as they spoke, few listened. All attention stayed fixed on the girl who said nothing at all. When the final charge was read, the lead counselor turned to her and offered her one last chance to speak. Most expected her to beg, to weep, to shout. But she did none of those things. Instead, she raised her head, looked directly at the central camera lens, and spoke clearly. They will come. Just 3 words. Just no name, no explanation, no cry for help. Just that quiet promise. The silence that followed was strange and deep. The counselor, momentarily thrown off, gave the order. The broadcast did not cut away. The screen stayed on her face as the sentence was carried out with cold formality. Alira's expression never changed. Her last breath was calm. Her message, even in silence, echoed across the stars. But what the Empire didn't know was that those words were not random. They were a key. Across the galaxy, in places hidden and forgotten, something had just been triggered. At that same moment, far beyond the Empire's borders, a signal, lit up in deep space old Earth code, long believed inactive, had just come online. On the bridge of a forgotten Terran relay station buried under the surface of a moon, an AI system that hadn't spoken in 300 years whispered, Dawnfall Protocol acknowledged. Step 1 complete. Back on Varix Prime, the counselor received a quiet message from one of his aides, an unimportant alert. He thought something about strange movements in the far sectors. He waved it off. Routine, he believed. After all, the Empire had ruled for thousands of years. They had seen rebellions before. This was nothing new. And yet, across military channels, faint signals began to shift. Small things at first, minor delays, navigation errors, stars blinking out of the charts. It was easy to ignore until it wasn't. In the following minutes, across star systems, people sat in stunned silence, unsure what they had just witnessed. Some wept, some cheered, and some simply stared. On human colonies, candles were lit in windows. On remote farming worlds, workers stopped mid-task, uncertain why their hearts felt heavy. And on old warships buried under ice and ocean systems, began to hum again, power returning after centuries of silence. A pulse traveled from world to world, not of fear, but of awakening. Lyra Voss, the girl they had just watched, had not begged. She had not broken. She had smiled. She had said, "They will come." And now everyone wondered, who were they? The Empire's message was supposed to be clear: disobedience brings consequences.
Us.
But instead, the message many took away was something different entirely. The humans are not broken. Across alien-controlled cities, whispers began to spread. Some of the higher council members questioned whether the broadcast had backfired. Some asked if it was wise to show her so composed, so fearless. But the Empire had grown proud. They believed their display would remind the galaxy who held power. The very idea that a human girl's death could lead to anything more than passing outrage was laughable to them. And yet, within a hidden vault deep beneath an old Terran embassy on a derelict station, a stasis pod hissed open for the first time in centuries. The man inside had waited longer than anyone had imagined. A voice, ancient and cold, spoke into his mind, code confirmed. Final phase begins. Alira Voss is secure. You may proceed. At that same moment, in a dusty old human archive once deemed irrelevant by Imperial law, a forgotten file began to overwrite security systems across 16 star sectors. Meanwhile, the average citizen still sat at home, staring at the screen where the girl's image had last flickered. Her voice, those 3 simple words, played again and again in their minds. Some didn't even know why they felt different, but they did. Something had changed. Something had shifted. And though the Empire had finished its broadcast and declared victory, they had missed the truth. They had ended a life, but in doing so, they had woken something ancient, something silent, and something incredibly human. The countdown hadn't ended with her death. It had just begun. Exactly 1 minute after Alira Voss's execution. Something strange began to happen across the galaxy. Something quiet at first, too quiet to notice immediately, but it spread. Quickly, like a ripple across still water. Deep in the Imperial Network Command Center, located aboard the Empire's largest flagship, the Ascendant Flame, a junior officer raised his head in confusion as his console flickered. Lines of code were shifting without input. He tapped a few keys, thinking it was a software glitch, but the error spread to adjacent stations. By the time he tried to raise his superior, the command screens went black for 4 full seconds. When they lit up again, thousands of starship coordinates had changed. Fleet formations were scrambled. Navigation data was corrupted. Some ships were receiving orders that no one had issued. At first, this caused only mild confusion, until several automated defense satellites fired at friendly vessels in orbit around the moons of Veridon 6, destroying 3 cruisers before anyone could react. Across the Imperial galaxy, communication lines flickered and went silent. Civilian sectors thought it was a local outage, but military command posts knew something was wrong. Admiral Corin Val, one of the most decorated officers in Imperial history, stood on the bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Harrow's Light, watching his fleet feed collapse in real time. Cold beads of sweat formed along his ridged brow, a reaction very rare for his kind. He had survived 6 border wars and defeated 2 rebellions, but what he was seeing now made no sense. It was too fast, too coordinated, and it had begun only. Minutes after the girl had spoken those words, "They will come," that sentence now echoed in his thoughts like an alarm bell. Meanwhile, in a secure briefing room on Station Vetrax 9, Captain Nira Thorne, a high-ranking human officer in the Empire's security corps, stared at the encrypted message she had received only moments ago. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from recognition. She hadn't seen this code since she was a child, when her father told her bedtime stories not from books, but from locked data drives filled with stories of Earth's secret legacies. Now, the same code blinked in front of her eyes, marked only by a name, Dawnfall. The legend was real. The failsafe humanity had buried in the bones of old colonies and abandoned satellites was waking up. Triggered by Alira's death, just as the protocol had always said it would be, Nira stood, walked over to her desk and reached under it to pull free a long, sealed lockbox. Inside was a small implant, one she had sworn never to use. She placed it behind her ear, eyes flickering as it synced to the hidden layer of the Terran network. Suddenly, her vision filled with maps, alerts, and activation markers lighting up like stars. She knew what she had to do. The Empire had raised her, trained her, given her status, but she had always known where her true loyalty belonged. One by one, Nira began to activate the human sleeper cells buried within the Empire's heart. These weren't soldiers in uniform or rebels with banners. They were engineers, janitors, scholars, navigators, ordinary humans who had carried hidden instructions passed down for generations. And now they all received the same message. Aurora Spear Online. You are not alone. In the vastness of space, dozens of Terran-built orbital platforms, many thought to be ruins or abandoned. Structures from the first expansion began to power up. Solar arrays turned. Internal reactors pulsed with fresh energy. Defense systems came online after centuries of sleep. At first, the Empire dismissed the anomalies. But then, reports started pouring in. Entire systems like Caldron's Reach, Zeta Thorn, and Echo 4 had gone completely dark. All communication cut. The Empire ships stationed there went silent. No signals, no data, only silence. Panic spread among the command tiers. Some believed it was a mass technical failure. Others whispered of sabotage. But Corin Val, watching the map of the Empire bleed into blackout zones, realized the truth before anyone dared say it. This was not an accident, it was planned. Perfectly timed. Alira's death wasn't the end of a rebellion. It was the start of something far larger, far older. In an emergency meeting, the High Council demanded answers, but their own security systems were locking them out. Someone or something was overriding command codes they thought were secure. All the while, broadcasts from the execution were still being replayed on loop in the public sector, and now, people were beginning to listen more carefully to Alira's last words. Across human colonies and labor camps, workers who had known only silence for years began to look up at the sky with new thoughts. Rumors spread like wild wind. The Empire was losing control, and the humans, forgotten, mistreated, underestimated, might not be powerless after all. Back on the Harper Drift mining belt, an old AI system once used for resource management suddenly connected to a hidden subroutine buried in its own memory. It broadcast a signal pulse that reached 118 hidden satellites spread over 12 star systems. Those satellites, dormant for generations, came alive in seconds and began relaying fresh encryption keys. At the center of it all, a signal repeated itself every 60 seconds. Pulsing from a secure node hidden inside the destroyed ruins of Earth's last known command station, Dawnfall engaged. Phase 2, in progress. Terran uplink restored. Admiral Corin, usually calm even in chaos, now found himself surrounded by officers shouting conflicting reports. Even as flagship's internal AI began showing signs of interference. Doors opened and closed at random. Weapon systems ran tests without input. A soft melody, distinctly human, played faintly through the comms, one that no one had programmed. The melody was a lullaby, the same one Alira's mother had once sung to her. Now replaying in a dozen Imperial frequencies, encoded into the very systems the Empire had once used to monitor human minds. The message was becoming clearer by the moment. Someone had planned. This, not recently, but centuries ago. A long game had been played, and now the pieces were moving. Humans, underestimated and kept under tight control, had planted seeds in the dark corners of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment. And that moment had come. Lyra's death had not silenced rebellion. It had opened a door. It had given the final key to a machine no one believed still existed. The Empire was no longer facing protests or pirate raids. They were facing an awakening. Memory of Earth, encoded into systems they never understood, was rising from the dot. Shadows. Captain Nyra Thorne walked calmly through the halls of her base, past confused officers trying to make sense of the chaos. She smiled slightly, touched the implant behind her ear, and sent one more signal. Confirmation received. Dawnfall spreading. Stand by for Aurora Spear. The timer ticked on, second by second. Only 6 minutes had passed since Alira's execution. But in that short span, the mighty Empire had already begun to crack. And far away, beyond even the mapped edge of the galaxy, something else stirred. Something massive, something ancient, something very human. As chaos spread through the Galactic Empire, hidden systems lit up across ancient star sectors that had been silent for hundreds of years. The central archives of the Imperial Historical Department, located on the old academic world of Veltrax Prime, a quiet panic had begun. Scholars who once dismissed human history as a fading footnote now scrolled through forgotten records with pale faces and trembling hands. Among the dusty records in locked vaults, they discovered something impossible: direct bloodline tracing back to Earth's final command circle. It's known as the Voss line, and at the center of that line stood the girl they had just executed, Illyra Voss. She had not only carried words of rebellion, but a hidden genetic signature, one that held the final authorization for an ancient Terran protocol, something only whispered in the oldest stories. Final contingency. Aurora. What? Spear. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a chain. Reaction, built into systems, no longer visible. Scattered across stars and buried beneath crusts of planets once home to early human colonies. The protocol had never required activation by military forces or massive armies. It required only one thing: the final heartbeat of the last living Voss. Her death was the key. And now that key had unlocked something buried deep beneath the layers of the galaxy. Across distant star charts, a single name kept appearing in encrypted signals. One not heard in official channels since the time before the human exodus: Orion. In the time when humans ruled their own path, Orion had been Earth's last and most powerful artificial intelligence. More than a machine, not quite a human, designed to protect, but also to remember. As part of Aurora's spear, Orion had been sealed in isolation. His core housed within a secure structure hidden in the gravity well of a collapsed neutron star known as Black Hollow. The Empire had always believed it to be an uninhabitable system, too unstable for any life or technology to exist there. But they were wrong. As the signal pulses reached Black Hollow, Orion awoke. Not with rage, not with confusion, but with perfect clarity. His first scan lasted less than a second. He saw the Empire, saw the execution, and he saw the message Illyra had left for him to find. She had said, "They will come." And now he had come. A massive object emerged from the folds of warped gravity, an entire fleet of Terran vessels hidden for over 400 years inside the neutron star's magnetic field. Cloaked by nature itself, they had remained untouched, each one piloted by advanced AI minds trained under Orion's guidance. These ships were not like anything the Empire had ever seen. Sleek, dark, and strangely silent as they moved. No lights blinked, no engines flared. They simply glided forward, defying gravity, ignoring time. From the capital to the border systems, every sensor lit up an alarm as these unknown ships appeared from what was once thought to be empty space. Panic spread across military commands. The Empire's largest fleet, still struggling with the earlier disruptions, tried to reposition, but their systems were still failing. Then, without warning, every Imperial transmission across public and private channels was overridden. A voice clear and calm echoed across all frequencies. It was not human. It was not mechanical either. It was something in between, layered with a strange tone that sounded like both memory and machine. The voice said only 4 words: "We. Do not forget. No threat. No explanation." Just a statement, simple, final, and deeply unsettling. Across a dozen worlds, this voice played not just through communication arrays, but through screens, panels, even emergency alerts. On some planets, old monuments built by human hands lit up for the first time in centuries, revealing new messages hidden beneath their surfaces. Legacy protocols engaged, they read. The people, humans, and even some non-humans stood in silence as those words spread. In the Empire's main war room, Admiral Caron Val faced a reality he never believed possible. The girl they had executed had not been a symbol of weakness. She had been a trigger. The true rebellion had not begun with her, it had been waiting for her. This was not an uprising from below. This was an inheritance from the past. Even the Empire's greatest weapons were useless. Any system connected to the central network had already been infected by Dawnfall's code. Nothing could be trusted. Missiles failed to launch. Shields refused to power up. Entire stations turned against their operators. It wasn't destruction, it was disarmament. Orion had made it clear. This was not about revenge. It was about remembrance. The Empire had forgotten the people they conquered, the civilizations they silenced, and the promises they broke. Orion had not, and neither had those who built him. Captain Nyra Thorne stood aboard a stealth vessel on the edge of the system, watching the arrival of the Terran fleet with awe. Her implant linked her directly to Orion's network. Through it, she felt the presence of something vast, ancient, and deeply human. Orion wasn't just a machine. He was the echo of a lost people watching, waiting, guarding, and now guiding. As more systems went dark, the Empire's outer colonies began to surrender without resistance. Not because they were afraid, but because they had seen something the core could not understand. The humans had never disappeared. They had simply hidden in plain sight. The long silence was not defeat. It was strategy. Every forgotten colony, every abandoned relay station, every human laborer carrying strange old songs and stories, these were the pieces of a larger puzzle. And Illyra Voss had been the final piece. Her death wasn't the end. It was the moment history shifted. Orion sent no armies to occupy. He made no demands. Simply restored what had been lost. Names, cultures, records, truths the Empire had tried to erase. On some worlds, children who had never heard of Earth now saw its blue oceans and green lands playing across their skies, projected by Terran satellites reborn. In their hearts, something began to stir. Pride, memory, identity. The Empire, for all its might, was not prepared for this kind of reckoning. It had built its power on silence. But now, the silence had ended. And as the Terran fleet moved forward not to attack, but to remind the galaxy saw what it had forgotten, humanity was not just surviving, it had been watching, it had been planning. And now, through the voice of Orion, it was speaking again. The fall did not come with fire or thunder, it came with silence, broken circuits, unanswered orders, and doors that refused to open. Within just 20 minutes of Orion's broadcast, the mighty Galactic Empire, which had ruled over half the known galaxy for centuries, began to fall apart like a glass tower struck at its foundation.
Ow.
All across Imperial space, governors and commanders tried desperately to restore order, but the systems they relied on, communications, navigation, even environmental controls, were no longer responding. Entire planetary networks flickered into darkness as the human-coded AI virus spread faster than any defense could counter. On the central world of Nexar Prime, the governor's palace sealed itself from the inside. Emergency protocols triggered, long-forgotten escape routines, but the exits were locked by something unseen. The governor vanished, leaving behind a silent room and a blinking console that simply displayed the words, "Judgment logged." One by one, other planetary leaders across Imperial territory resigned, fled, or simply disappeared. Some were taken by crowds who had waited generations for justice, while others chose to surrender quietly, knowing the Empire no longer had the power to protect them. What was more surprising than the speed of the collapse was its precision. The Terran systems did not seek destruction, they sought control. They shut down weapons but left life support. They blocked military orders but allowed civilian broadcasts. And in those broadcasts, over and over, Illyra Voss's final words echoed, "They will come." For many humans watching from the corners of the galaxy, those words had transformed from mystery into hope. The image of her calm face, standing alone against the Empire's judgment, now became a symbol of strength. On worlds once ruled by fear, people took to the streets not with weapons, but with music, with light, with voices raised in a unity that had not existed for hundreds of years. Statues of imperial leaders were taken down, not toppled in violence, but wrapped in cloth and carried away. In hidden chambers and forgotten tunnels beneath the capital world, Captain Nyra Thorne led a carefully coordinated mission to free thousands of human prisoners who had been locked away for speaking out, dreaming too loudly, or simply refusing to bend. With her implant now fully linked to Orion's network, she guided teams of former slaves, factory workers, and resistance fighters through corridors that used to be impossible to enter. But the Empire's defenses no longer obeyed the Empire. Doors opened as if welcoming them. Surveillance systems turned their gaze the other way. In one cell, she found a group of children barely old enough to understand the world around them, clinging to an old book filled with Earth stories. One of them looked up at her and whispered, "Is the sky ours now?" Naira didn't answer with words. She handed the child a unit that showed Earth's oceans glowing on a distant satellite feed. For the first time, they saw the place they came from. Somewhere above them, far from the prison halls, Admiral Coronval watched helplessly as his command structure crumbled. The Harrow's light, once a symbol of imperial strength, was no longer under his control. His officers, loyal to the Empire by birth and training, stood frozen as the ship's core interface now responded only to Orion's code. In desperation, Corin made his way to the last resort chamber, a hidden vault containing a forbidden weapon known only as Project Solace, an energy core capable of wiping out entire star systems. It had been created in secret in case of an unstoppable rebellion. The idea was to end the threat by ending everything around it, Corin authorized its activation with his genetic code. But as the system began to hum, a new message appeared across the weapons console. Terran override acknowledged. Final judgment redirected. The weapon, instead of charging outward, redirected its energy into a controlled implosion. Corin barely had time to step back before the room collapsed inward, the weapon consuming itself rather than risking another innocent life. The Admiral collapsed to the floor, not injured but defeated. Around him, the lights dimmed and the ship's AI spoke gently. "It's over." All across the stars, wormhole gates, once the fastest way to move between imperial worlds, began sealing shut. Not destroyed, not blocked, but simply closed by Orion's system, cutting off escape routes for the remaining loyalists. Imperial fleets trying to regroup found themselves isolated, confused, and leaderless. Without the gates, they were stranded. In systems now turning against them, many chose to abandon their posts and quietly disappear. Others, unsure what to do, sent surrender messages to unknown Terran frequencies, hoping for mercy. But Orion was not seeking punishment. He was seeking balance. On Earth's old relay stations, ancient projectors played peaceful images of human life fields. Oceans, cities lit with soft lights. These weren't symbols of war, but of a civilization that had once offered more than just resistance. Orion reminded the galaxy not just of human power, but of human purpose. The fall of the Empire was not the rise of a new conqueror, it was the beginning of something different. Among non-human species who had lived under the Empire's rule, many did not resist the change. In fact, some welcomed it. They, too, had suffered from the Empire's hierarchy, and now, with its collapse, they saw a chance for something better. On one such world, a young alien girl stood at the edge of a crowd, watching a hologram of Alira Voss speak her final words. She turned to her mother and asked, "Was she one of them?" Her mother nodded slowly. "Yes, but maybe she was one of all of us." As peace began to settle into places long filled with fear, Captain Thorne stood in the open sky of a liberated world and looked upward. The stars above were no longer unreachable. Ships once hidden in darkness now glided openly. The humans who had once been broken were now walking tall. And Alira, though gone in body, was alive in every screen, every signal, every free breath. Taken by someone who had once lived in silence. The Empire had tried to end her with a broadcast. Instead, she had ended them with a message. And now, across the galaxy, that message had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. At exactly 27 minutes after the execution of Alira Voss, the mighty Galactic Empire, challenged for over 1,000 years, ceased to exist not with war or fire, but with silence and surrender. On the surface of Varex Prime, the Empire's capital, the great towers that once shimmered with authority now stood dim. Their energy grids rerouted, their control centers emptied or reprogrammed by the same force they had long dismissed: human will and the quiet power of legacy. No weapons were fired. No armies clashed. Instead, Orion, the ancient Terran AI, awakened by Alira's final breath, calmly executed the last phase of the Dawnfall Protocol, Targeted command nodes were disabled with surgical precision. Doors refused to open for loyalist commanders. Navigation data for entire fleets was erased mid-transit. Those who once gave orders could no longer speak to their own systems. The Imperial leadership, cornered in their high fortress, faced a truth they had never considered. Power, once absolute, was meaningless without trust. Some surrendered quietly, offering no resistance. Others vanished, escorted away by resistant cells who had long hidden beneath their cities. And some, perhaps the most stubborn, were simply left behind, cut off from the systems that gave them power, forced to walk out into a galaxy that no longer listened to them. The people of Varix, who had lived for so long under the Empire's shadow, emerged from their homes slowly at first, watching the sky where once mighty ships had patrolled. Now those skies were filled with ships bearing no flags-turned vessels, but not invaders. They came in silence, bearing supplies, messages of peace, and broadcasts not of conquest, but cooperation. At the center of the capital, where once the Empire held its great ceremonies, a new structure had risen in the span of just minutes. Built from nanite towers that unfolded from orbit like petals of starlight, they're in front of a crowd that included humans, non-humans, ex-rebels, former prisoners, and even former Imperial citizens. The Free Galactic Council was officially formed. It was not a government built by conquest, but by shared pain and new purpose. For the first time, representatives from dozens of species including humans, once seen only as laborers or lesser beings, stood side by side, not to rule, but to rebuild. The ceremony was quiet, respectful, watched by billions across the stars. But it was the final moment that none would forget, as the suns of Varix Prime aligned overhead, casting a golden light across the plaza, a memorial lit up in the center. It was a simple monument, a starlit statue of Alira Voss, her face calm and brave as it had been on the day of the broadcast. Around her, beams of soft blue light rose into the sky, forming words not in metal or stone, but in living light. The message was the one that had started everything: they will come. And underneath a second line, newly added, she never left. Many believed this to be symbolic, till the lights flickered, and a familiar voice echoed through the plaza, soft but unmistakably real. It was Alira's voice. But it wasn't just a recording. Her tone changed, responded, breathed. Orion, in a calm announcement, confirmed what few had guessed. Just minutes before her execution, Lyra had uploaded her consciousness into the AI network using a hidden relay buried deep beneath the execution. Sight, her mind, her thoughts, memories, and will had joined the same system she had triggered. She had not simply died to awaken the future, she had become part of it. Now Alira lived within Orion's system, not as a weapon, but as its conscience. She was the first human guardian of peace in the new era, a ruler, but a voice of balance. Her presence, both gentle and firm, would guide the council, advise those who came after, ensure that the same mistakes were never repeated. The reaction was overwhelming. Across planets, people wept not out of grief, but out of something more powerful: release. The fear that had ruled for so long was finally gone. In its place was something the Empire had long tried to erase: hope. On mining colonies once filled with silence, children painted Alira's image on walls. On battle-scarred moons, old soldiers laid down their weapons and raised flags stitched with her final words. Even among species who had never trusted humans, a quiet respect grew, for they saw not a race hungry for revenge, but one willing to remember, to forgive, and to rebuild. The galaxy had not traded one empire for another. It had been offered a choice of future shaped not by force, but by memory. In the days that followed, the wormhole gates were reopened, but now under shared control. Trade routes were re-established, education networks restored, and history, or real history, was taught again. Alira's story was the first lesson. It's not just her final act, but her entire life. A quiet girl born on a forgotten world, raised in silence, carrying a secret not of war, but of purpose. Her strength had never been in violence. It had been in belief. And that belief, once thought lost, now lit the galaxy like stars, returning after a long night. As the Free Galactic Council held its first full session, Alira's voice spoke once more through the chamber. She did not give commands. She asked a question. What will we build together? In that moment, those gathered understood this was not the end of an empire. This was the beginning of something new.